From the looks of the topographic map, Gumjuwac looks like it should be a great time. From the looks of the topographic map, Gunsight Ridge exists in the middle of nowhere, not really hooking up to anything. Gumjuwac doesn't look like an appealing climb, and Gunsight looks like an out and back ridge ride, which isn't a very attractive option either. Fortunately, as long as a little road climbing isn't completely objectionable, a short section of Highway 30 and Forest Service Road 3540 connect Gunsight Ridge and Gumjuwac into a 14-mile loop with 2,700 feet of climbing. The best way to start this ride is to navigate to the bottom of the Gumjuwac trail and park in the wide area across the highway. I'll include coordinates to the trailhead in the video description below. Proceed south along Highway 30 for 1 mile, over which you'll gain 250 feet of elevation, making for a nice warm-up until you get to the intersection with the 3540 road, which looks like this. From here, the road will proceed downhill for about 3/4 of a mile. Don't be alarmed by this little section of downhill. It only loses about 75 feet of elevation, although it can feel like a lot more because it's really easy to be especially attuned to any elevation loss at the beginning of a ride like this, just knowing that it will all need to be regained at some point. The top of Gunsight Ridge is visible in glimpses from this road about 2,000 feet overhead. 1,500 feet of that elevation gain to the top of the ridge will be accomplished on this road. Over the next 3.6 miles, the road maintains an easy 5.6% average grade, gaining about 1,000 feet in elevation. The forest on either side of the road is moderately well grown in, providing adequate and welcome shade for the ascent. This feels downright pleasant, and it's a nice, low-key start to a bike ride. When the road arrives at this intersection after the pavement ends, the easy part is over. Get a snack and enjoy the view of Mount Hood from here. Take this fish hook turn to the right, the gravel road that looks like it goes straight up the hill. This is where the punishment starts. This section of road will gain 525 feet of elevation over the next 4,000 feet of distance, making for an average grade of 13%. Don't feel bad if you need to dismount the bike on this section of road. You're not weak, it's just that this road is very steep. After that steep climb, the road will end at this big gravel pad with fantastic views of Mount Hood. This is a great place to camp if your car can make it up here too. This is another great place to stop and take pictures. To continue the ride from here, follow this improbable little dirt path that empties out onto the Bennett Pass road, on which you'll take a left. This is the same Bennet Pass that doubles as a ski trail in the winter and starts on the other side of the exit that leads to the base area of Mount Hood Meadows ski area, in case you were curious. There isn't even a mile of climbing on the Bennet Pass road before it leads to the trailhead. I like the Bennett Pass road. It's more of a dirt road than a gravel road, so even though it's double track, it's kind of still fun to ride on a bicycle because the surface is a little bit spicy. It's not very fun to drive a car on though. I've done it before, and this road can get scary in places on a car. Fortunately, you're on a bicycle. After 3/4 of a mile, the road will arrive at this intersection. This is both where the Gunsight Ridge trail begins and where the road intersects with Forest Service Road 3550, which parallels the trail a little bit further down the ridge. You'll see the entrance to the Gunsight Ridge trail tucked away on the north side of this intersection just west of the road junction. Gunsight Ridge is a classic ridgeline trail, meaning there's a lot of elevation change with rolling ups and downs, as well as punchy little climbs thrown in for good measure. This is a lot like the Surveyor's Ridge trail in that it climbs along a ridge line while paralleling a Forest Service road and offering multiple exposures of the mountain to the west. The difference is that this ridge is a little higher elevation and the forest is a bit more closed in. Gunsight Ridge is a 44 trail, and I put the tread on 44 trails into two categories: dusty or crispy. The more heavily ridden 44 trails to the north and east of here are generally more dusty, probably due in part to the increased frequency of use as well as just differences in ecology. Anyhow, the Gunsight Ridge trail, it's a crispy trail, meaning that the tread is coated in a layer of dried out needles and twigs that sort of crackle under the tires in a not unpleasant way as you ride. There is a rock slide or two as you climb this first descent. This is where you'll be glad you brought your full suspension bike, if in fact you did bring your full squish on this ride. Nearing the top of this ride, the surface starts to trend from crispy to dusty. It's almost like this one sits in the middle of the transition between dusty to crispy. Maybe I'm making too much of this distinction. Anyhow, you'll know you're near the top of the ride when you get to this rock pile. For some reason, there's a bunch of rock piles at the top of this ridge. I guess that means you're at the summit. After the rock piles, the trail starts to mostly trend downhill a little, which is a welcome respite until it arrives here at this exposed rock pile on the left. You can climb this pile of rocks to get a great view of Mount Hood. This is obviously the lunch spot. Like, with views like this, how could this not be the lunch spot? So stop here and enjoy your PBJ because you earned it, and watch the birds of prey circling below you. From the lunch spot, there's about 1.4 miles of reasonably technical trail that climbs and descends, climbs again up and down narrow switchbacks and through rock slides, like this rock slide that was pretty significant. I almost pedaled the whole thing. Right after this rock garden, you'll start to catch glimpses of the road that parallels the trail. I mentioned the trail gets technical here, didn't I? There's a few challenging rock gardens throughout this section, as well as just general uphilliness when you probably are no longer in the mood for uphill. The soil is also considerably looser and rockier here as well. Eventually, the trail will lead to this small little meadow where you can get a good view of Central Oregon, and there are wildflowers. There's paintbrush, some purple things, some white things, yellow things, really every color of wildflowers represented here. Shortly after this outcropping, the trail joins up with the road, becoming the road for about 1/8 of a mile or so. It's really obvious where the trail restarts on the left. This is also where the last legitimately technical climb on the ride begins, proceeding up some steep and tight eroded switchbacks. Actually, there will be a fun little teaser descent right where it feels like the fun should be starting before you get to this one last steep gut punch of a climb that starts right here where I broke the Incredibell I had mounted to my handlebars. So in case you were thinking of buying or trying the Incredibell, there's my review of it. It's even easier to break than the Timberbell. Anyway, there'll be some more climbing after this bell breaking switchback before the trail actually finally trends downhill through some loose soil and tight switchbacks. This is 44 trail descending here for sure. You'll lose about 500 feet over a mile of descent through some pretty cool sections of burned out forest, affording you great views, so be sure to get some pictures as this is the last exposure of the ride. The forest thickens as you get closer to the bottom of this initial descent that dumps you out at Gumjuwac Saddle, where the road ends and a bunch of irrelevant trails into the wilderness area start. But we're not interested in those trails. We're interested in how Gumjuwac got its name. And thankfully, there's this interpretive sign placed here for our benefit. It says, years ago, a French-Canadian sheep herder whose name was Jack, who always wore gum shoes, camped here. They couldn't even do it in multiple sentences. Anyhow, I was really hoping for something better than that. Really boring story. Anyhow, it's all downhill from here. And that's a good thing in this case. I'd been wondering about Gumjuwac for years before I rode this. So this was really scratching an itch for me. It's a pretty cool descent. The top half is more gradual than the bottom half, but other than that, there's nothing particularly surprising on this trail. It's a 44 trail. It rides like a 44 trail. It actually really reminded me of Dog River in a lot of ways, just without the super tight switchbacks. It still had a lot of tight switchbacks, just not the comically tight ones that you see like on Dog River. It even had a super rocky, unrideable section with a great view of Mount Hood, just like Dog River does. You know, that one section that nobody can ride or nobody should ride. The super high, it looks, it's so similar. It's weird how Gunsight and Gumjuwac are sort of this inverted remote version of Surveyors and Dog River. The trail will descend through this high consequence rock garden, which is full of sharp-edged rock that's not steep enough to just charge your way through it. Other than that initial tech, the rest of the trail is just brake-burning super steep bench through thick east side forest. It's a well-built trail with switchbacks that are radiused for hikers. It's old school hiking trail at its finest. Speaking of hikers, you need to watch out for hikers on this trail. A lot of hikers start here in order to make their way up into the wilderness area. Personally, I wouldn't recommend this trail to any hikers as it's super steep, and you can hear traffic from Highway 30 all the way up to the top of the ridge, and there's not really any jaw-dropping views. What you see is what I showed you is what you get. Whatever. So I had fun on this descent. As far as recommendations go, I would suggest this ride to someone who's already ridden all the other 44 trails and was putting off Gunsight because it's an orphan and putting off Gumjuwac because it looks impossible to climb. But if you're showing off the area to out-of-towners, or this is your first time riding any 44 trails, whatever it is, definitely don't include this ride. Yeah, if you live in the area, you definitely should do this at some point. But otherwise, go do something better. Go do something more canonical, like Surveyor's Ridge, because this doesn't do anything that Surveyor's Ridge doesn't do slightly better. Well, that should be all the information that you need to ride this trail. Now, I'd like to take this moment to thank all my Patreon supporters, especially Heather Van Valkenburg, my Hero Dirt Level sponsor. If you want to hear your name mentioned at the end of my videos alongside Heather, you too can support me at the $10 a month level. Just navigate to patreon.com/voiceovertrails and choose the sponsorship level that works best for you. Now, get out there and go ride your bike.